This is Wrap the News. Today we're going to be talking about the Saharan dust cloud, which I renamed the Sub-Saharan Transatlantic Slave Cloud. Let's get into that. This dust storm follows the same path of the transatlantic slave trade. The same path that the eclipse of August 21st, 2017 followed, and it went backwards, remember? And it's the same path that the hurricanes, all these big huge hurricanes, follow. They all follow the path of the transatlantic slave trade along with the sharks of the ocean. Chad, which they say this dust storm is coming from, is the center of West Africa. When the Hebrew Israelites out here decide to take a DNA test to check their DNA, a lot of times it states Sub-Saharan Africa. So it is stating that you are Saharan. Who get that? You're from Sahara. Same as the cloud that follows the transatlantic slave trade. And so it states Sub-Saharan Africa, and Chad is one of the general locations of where they say the Hebrew Israelite was taken from. Israel, we know that's where we're from, where we were taken from Chad, hiding in Chad. Who get that? This storm comes with good and evil, depending on who you are and what you do. The bad is proclaimed in Deuteronomy 28:24. The Lord shall make the rain of thy land powder and dust from heaven, shall it come down upon thee until you be destroyed. So with the dust in this cloud comes dust pneumonia, lung and respiratory failure, upper respiratory failure, and eventually sepsis and death. Everybody is not going to die from it. It usually states in the scriptures that 1/3 of mankind or population get destroyed, and the others suffer different fates. The good news is that I heard that the same dust that's being carried over here from the Most High is in fact the same dust that Abraham traveled on, and Moses and the children of Israel during the first Exodus. They traveled on the sub-Saharan desert between Egypt and Israel. Tons of that dust is being brought right now to the European nations every year, and most definitely we are walking on this sacred ground. God said, make a path for him in the wilderness. Could he be bringing the wilderness to us? He said, make a path in the desert, a highway. Could he be bringing the same dust from the exact same highway our forefathers walked on during the first Exodus, which would be no less than amazing and a miracle, right? Exodus 40:3. The voice of him that crieth in the wilderness, prepare ye the way of the Lord, make straight in the desert a highway for our God, and the desert is being brought. Get ready for our Exodus, Israel.
A legendary great desert separated the borders of ancient Israel from the land of Egypt. This was the great and terrible wilderness of the Old Testament. The desert that the Hebrews had to cross on the exodus out of Egypt. Abraham on his journey between Canaan and Egypt, and Moses on his flight from Egypt to Midian. Traditional biblical scholarship has identified this legendary great desert with Egypt's eastern peninsula, the region known today as the Sinai.
Again, plenty of extra biblical as well as biblical evidence of constant moving back and forth between Palestine and Egypt, particularly in times of famine.
This differs very much from the great desert that is described in the Old Testament, and which the Bible describes as a great and treacherous desert that was located outside of Egyptian borders and control, and which took the Hebrews months to migrate across before reaching Mount Sinai.
In the 3rd month, when the children of Israel were gone forth out of the land of Egypt, the same day came they into the wilderness of Sinai.
The only desert in the entire region that fulfills the biblical description given of the great and terrible wilderness of the Exodus is the Saharan desert, is the Saharan desert, is the Saharan desert.
NOAA is tracking a giant dust cloud out of the Sahara Desert that has already traveled nearly 5,000 miles, now covering parts of the Caribbean. Ellen Baca joining us now. It's one of the biggest dust plumes we've seen in quite some time.
Yeah, so you can see it rolling off of Africa and then spreading across the Caribbean. This is as we go towards the end of the week, and then it should eventually be climbing up towards West Michigan. So this is a big launch of dust from the desert, and depending on how the different jet streams in the atmosphere are working, it can sometimes carry it clear across the ocean and then through the Atlantic, and then through the Atlantic, and then through the Atlantic, and then through the Atlantic.
Seen from space, traveling thousands of miles from North Africa and through the Caribbean. Here's Puerto Rico before and after, now sweeping parts of the southeast.
Up first this evening, Jamaica is now being impacted by an abnormally large plume of dust from the Sahara Desert in Africa, which arrived in the Caribbean yesterday. Now, as bad as today was, the Met Service says the country should see greater effects of the dust particles come tomorrow.
So I think it's a good weekend to maybe find something indoors, particularly for patients with significant illness.
Staff at Texas Ear, Nose, and Throat have been paying close attention to a wave of Saharan dust making its way across the Atlantic.
We know that hospital admissions for asthma exacerbations increase when these sorts of dust clouds come into regions.
Exodus 40, number 3. The voice of him that crieth in the wilderness, prepare ye the way of the Lord, make straight in the desert a highway for our God, and the desert is being brought. Get ready for our Exodus, Israel.